Do you know what the greatest lie on Geekvolution is, dear listener? That any review will ever be as short as I predict it will. In part 2, I covered the first hour and 10 minutes of Batman v Superman in painful detail, chronologically. I had hoped to get through the rest of the film in this part, but I'm finding this middle section just as chock full of bizarre story choices and non sequiturs as I did the first part. So I lied. We're going to be here a while, folks. Strap in and let's look at the next 50 minutes or so, this ostensible second act under a magnifying glass. And if you fall asleep and dream of a dystopian future where I've lost my mind and become a psychotic despot because reviewing this movie like this made me susceptible to the anti-life equation, would you just let me know in the comments? Just say, reviewing BVS is the key, and I'll know to stop the madness. If I can. I've been writing about this so long, I think I'm kind of getting addicted to it. Clark gets a set of Polaroids, really? In 2016? Okay. Of Batman's brutal assaults on criminals, labeled judge, jury, executioner, and the last one says justice with a question mark. This further suggests the movie is supposed to be about what justice is and isn't. I guess the dawn of justice is Batman not doing that anymore when he decides not to brand Lex in Arkham at the end. Didn't he used to be about justice, though, before he crossed that line? Oh, whatever. Justice is in the title because Justice League. Thanks to Connor Nielsen for pointing out that the handwriting on these pictures looks suspiciously like the handwriting on the checks Keith apparently sends back to Bruce, which is used as more motivation later for Bruce to hate Superman. I'm assuming Keith didn't do this himself. How would he have gotten these Polaroids? They look like they were probably taken by KG Beast and sent to the Daily Planet to make sure Clark knows inmates are dying in prison because of the Bat brand. I'll do a deep dive on the check thing when we get there, but I'm not sure why Lex would want this to look like Keith's handwriting. It doesn't matter, though, because Lois never connects those dots. I assume it's just a clue for the audience, maybe to tell us Lex is behind the check thing later. That reminds me, earlier, when Clark tells Perry the police won't do anything about Batman, it makes me wonder what Gordon thinks about all of this, and where the heck he is. This story really needs Commissioner Gordon and makes a lot more sense to introduce him with this plot than in Justice League, or at least the version of that movie I've seen to date. The picture is darkly questioning whether Batman's new methods are about justice are intercut with Bruce accessing Lex's files and learning that the white Portuguese isn't a man but a ship. I wondered why we were jumping back and forth between these two scenes, because they don't seem to have anything to do with each other, except, I guess, that Bruce is about to prove the picture's right, that he is judge, jury, and executioner when he decides to destroy Superman. It's plotted enough like an 80s cartoon, might as well use lingo like destroy. Why don't we see him open the files on the other superheroes here? For some reason, that's saved for later, half an hour after the last time I thought about those files, when we'll see that surveillance footage of Wonder Woman and the picture from 1918 that she's after. And then the rest even later, along with Wonder Woman, after Bruce has sent her those files. If that Justice League setup has to be in this movie, this is the most natural place to see those surveillance videos. Bruce sees the Flash in what seems like a weird vision. He doesn't know what to make of it, but then he sees the same guy on his monitor that came back to give him that warning. That would help confirm right away that there's something to what he saw, and maybe motivate him more quickly to act. If he knows right away the Flash is real, he won't think it's just a dream. As it stands, it watches like Bruce is either more intensely resolved to kill Superman because of the premonition, or it has no bearing on him at all, and he would have reacted to getting kryptonite the same way regardless. If we didn't see Batman in the future or Flash's warning, I don't think viewers would have believed Bruce's impending speech to Alfred about why Superman must be destroyed any more or less than they did with it. He's just as likely to give the 1% speech. So Bruce tells Alfred that Lex has kryptonite, that it can kill Superman, and he's going to steal it. Alfred, always playing Jiminy Cricket, says with a shred of hope that surely Bruce is going after the kryptonite to keep it out of Lex's hands, to destroy it. When Bruce says no, Alfred has really had it. I love the intensity of both Irons and Affleck's performances in this scene, and once again, I just want this movie. This is a big moment, Bruce's first major opportunity for change, which he doesn't take, and the movie puts him squarely in the wrong. Alfred's ostensibly reasonable argument is the lifeline he ignores. Now, it's more complicated than it's meant to be, because I think I'm sympathizing more with Bruce in this moment than I'm supposed to. When Alfred says that Superman is not our enemy, that's the argument we're supposed to side with, at least according to Snyder in his lockdown commentary. But look at this from Bruce's point of view. A. Superman acted like a god fighting above mere mortals, and forgot about them when he fought Zod. Thousands of people died. B. Bruce just had a vision of Superman becoming the warlord he's afraid he can't stop moments earlier. And even though there's not any real evidence to back up its authenticity, because he doesn't actually see kryptonite in that box, at the moment that's the only thing that would tell him that there's any reality to that, he might be able to tell that Flash was really in that room like I could. I'm not sure about that. See, Bruce thinks Superman is taking matters into his own hands and acting recklessly, both at home and abroad. Although, I'd think there might be evidence in those files of Lex's conspiracy, but we're never told that. So I'm going to work under the assumption he doesn't know about that. And as I discussed in part 2, we don't know how Superman has handled other situations apart from Africa, only that Finch and others are worried he's acting on his own. Bruce is depicted as paranoid, but I'm more with him than I want to be in this scene. I'm not saying he should outright try to kill Superman. He's definitely not handling this right. He should try to talk to Superman at the very least. But I also don't agree with Alfred that Bruce should just destroy all the kryptonite. Maybe deliver it to the authorities in case Superman proves himself untrustworthy. He's a question mark before he's our friend or our enemy. And Alfred might feel a little differently if Bruce told him about the future he saw. Bruce's argument is a valid one. I mean, he brought the war to us is a little hyperbolic. It's not Superman's fault Zod came after him on Earth. Is he partially responsible for the casualties? A case could be made. That's why if Clark was smart, he'd have made a public statement and tried to explain how he did the best he could and regrets what happened. But I guess he needs the ghost of his dead father to tell him you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs first. Oh, and side note, Affleck's voice is so low and chilling in this scene, he does not need that voice synthesizer. He practically sounds like he's using it here. He doesn't need to do a voice like Bale did, he just needs to speak in that register. It's the perfect sound for Batman. I'd go as far as to say if I heard that in animation, it would have the chance of rivaling Kevin Conroy's Batman voice. The argument that you can't trust a guy with that much power is debatable. Bruce is using anecdotal evidence about good guys not staying that way. But it's harder to argue with the collateral damage point, that he's a guy who's already crossed a line, and if there's a chance he might go further, don't we have to do something about that? This argument sounds mad against the Christopher Reeve Superman, but not this one. It's a little like trying to preempt tragedy using that Hydra algorithm in Winter Soldier. Personally, I more take the Captain America side, give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove they don't deserve it, but there is an argument to be made. Bruce could so much more easily connect those dots, and the 1% chance he's our enemy line would sound so much less paranoid to Alfred if Bruce gave him the context of the future Flash showed him. And Alfred might not think he's so off the rails then. Maybe Alfred wouldn't believe him if Bruce told him about that, but later on he gets real solid proof when he sees the Flash file. So overall, it watches like drama born out of unnecessary secrets, and I don't like that. But solely from Bruce's point of view, I see how he's come to this drastic conclusion, and if only Batman and Superman had a conversation, this could be the basis for an ideological argument. It might go something like this. Batman: I've seen the future, and you take over the world, kill anyone who gets in your way, and murder me. Superman: I don't think I would ever do that, but now that we know that happens, maybe we can prevent it. Let's work together, find some common ground. The enemy is that Superman, not me. Batman: No, it's not worth the risk. I don't see any other choice. I'm sorry, I have to kill you. Make it an interpersonal conflict about faith versus certainty, and holding to your principles versus committing any wrong to prevent catastrophe. If the big showdown started like that, where the two men just can't find a compromise, so it happens because at least one of them can't come up with a better way, I'd be much more on board with this idea. Make it a clearer Minority Report situation. I also expected Alfred to point out Bruce's hypocrisy here. When he says how many good guys are left, how many stayed that way, I'm surprised Alfred doesn't make a comment about how Bruce is proving himself an example of that, and that while there might be a chance, 1% or otherwise, that Superman could become the enemy, what Batman's been doing certainly puts him in that category. And once he's taken down the closest thing on Earth to a god, based on what might happen, why should anyone trust him any more than he trusts Superman? Whatever his comment might have been, I'd have liked Alfred to get the last word there. But then maybe the idea is he's so taken aback by Bruce's resolve, he uncharacteristically doesn't know what to say. And that unshakable determination and willingness to throw away his own humanity over this is what most makes Batman's turn at the end intolerable to me. This scene and the Martha reveal do not belong in the same movie together. Hard enough to make me buy that happening in the same movie regardless. We seem to be ramping up to a physical confrontation pretty soon, as just after Bruce decides he's going to try to kill Superman, the wife of a man killed in prison over Batman's mark, who says, "The Bat's the judge," tells Clark words won't stop him. You know what does? A fist. Spoiler alert, it's still gonna be quite a while before we get to that fight. That fist line is strange because Batman's been operating for 20 years, and you'd expect he's been hit in the face lots of times, unless she's talking specifically about Superman's fist, and of course, obviously, the woman doesn't know she's talking to Superman. It's an odd thing to say. I should also mention, this is another thing Lex seems to be manipulating that he doesn't need to. Am I supposed to buy the only reason this is happening is because KG Beast is going into prisons and pushing prisoners to murder each other? Is the idea that Batman actually isn't doing that on purpose, or isn't even aware of it? That it's not really his fault that people are getting killed? And even though the brand is a little sadistic and going a little too far, this whole thing is supposed to be a misunderstanding, just like Superman in Africa? I'm so confused as to what each of these characters is intending with their questionable deeds and whether they're even responsible for them. And if it is all one giant misunderstanding, why is that never stated anywhere? It's like the script was passed around between 19 different writers who each made up the next scene based on the last, didn't read the rest of the script, and weren't all that interested in building on the one scene they had. But at least now we've got crystal clear motives for Batman and Superman to want to take each other out of commission. Only took an hour and 13 minutes. Yeesh. Some of these scenes seem arbitrarily placed to me. I don't know what Perry wants to talk to Clark about in the scene where he can't find him, but it seems like that could be dropped almost anywhere in the movie. Perry says, clicks his heels together 3 times, goes back to Kansas, I suppose. So why not use it later, right before Clark talks to his mother on the farm? Sometimes I'll expect the end of a scene to be there for a transition, but this movie doesn't have many of those. I sometimes wonder how much of this movie was even written in sequence. Finally, action in our superhero brawler action movie. Batman goes after the kryptonite at the docks, and it's being unloaded off the white Portuguese, in a scene that feels like it should have come 15 to 20 minutes into the movie. This is, of course, one of the most infamous scenes in the film, and where it lost a lot of people in the theater. It's wild to me that it took that long for people. It lost me at metahuman thesis. Yeah, Batman thinks killing Superman is a necessary evil, and they're expecting him to come back from the insane branding thing, but mowing people down with his Batmobile is going too far. I'm not sure a lot of people that complained about that realize the implication of the permanent mark Batman is giving to criminals. That's not just cruel and unusual, he's getting them killed in prison. But then again, I don't know if he's doing that on purpose. But I honestly didn't even notice this until the whole internet lost its collective mind about it, just like I needed public outrage about everyone Superman seems to get killed in Man of Steel before I picked up on that. I tend to tune out during scenes like this. Snyder isn't telling story with his action. Arguably, he's not always doing that when people are talking either. These scenes are rides that get us from point A to point B. You shove popcorn in your mouth watching the chasing, or the punching, or the explosions. You get a pacifying light show for a few minutes. the characters involved, or wherever they end up at the end, doesn't matter how they got there, and then it's on with the narrative, such as it is. It would be disingenuous not to mention the Batmobile chase in Batman Begins here too, where Batman is flipping cop cars less violently than the vehicles he flips here, but I mean, somebody's in a car that flips at all, there's a good chance they don't make it. That is a somewhat different situation. That Bruce is desperate to save Rachel, and Alfred does call him out on it, but yeah, he's lucky no one seemed to die there. I'm not excusing that, but this is worse because no one talks about it at all, and the stakes aren't such that it seems necessary. Batman could be murderously taking his anger about the Superman situation out on Lex's men, and it could be played as part of his rampage, which is good fuel for Superman's fire. After all, this isn't just about Batman having a reason to take Superman out. And to be fair, Superman does tell him to stop being Batman right after this. I don't know how much he saw, and I guess he came too late to stop it. But it has no real bearing on the story, and it would unfold the same way if Batman just dodged everything and no one got hurt at all. Also, in Snyder's commentary, he coyly says he forgot to do pickup shots showing everyone getting up from this. He doesn't want us to think Batman's a murderer in this scene, even though he might be a murderer with the brand regardless. Again, still fuzzy on that. I don't know if Snyder is saying that retroactively because he was surprised by the backlash, or if it actually never occurred to him people have to die in that scene. That seems to also be going on with his action in Man of Steel. But you'd think he'd have learned his lesson, given that all the carnage that's never addressed in that movie is retroactively made Bruce's initial motivation for not trusting Superman. I gotta wonder if there wasn't a stealthier way for Batman to try to steal the kryptonite. He puts a tracker on it, and then he conspicuously drives his car at the truck, hoping to get to it before it arrives at its destination. Presumably, wherever it's going will be too fortified for him to realistically break in undetected. But instead of shooting a tracer at the big rig with that gun from Dark Knight Returns, why not shoot a smoke bomb or something, and try to distract and confuse everyone around the truck, then take out the guards there? That seems potentially less risky than what he does, and a lot more covert. But this Batmobile is fantastic, the perfect blend of tank and low-riding sports car. I bought a model of it as soon as the merchandise came out, and it's a lot of fun to watch it move with those inclined wheels, so I'm not going to complain too much about a big chase after so much incoherent and dull conversation. But this isn't where Batman steals the kryptonite, and it's dumb that he attempts it this way instead of just doing what he does later at LexCorp, so it's sad that the only time we see the Batmobile is in a completely superfluous scene. I love how over the top some of this is, like the crazy bit with the Batmobile driving through a huge boat in slow motion. If only the movie didn't take itself so zod darn seriously. Oh, and yes, Zack Snyder, I can tell the boats are a 100% visual effect. You really don't need to point that out in your commentary. Superman comes out of nowhere to stop Batman in his tracks in both cuts. I don't know how he knows where Batman is going to be, even with the last Clark investigation scene, which only confirms people are dying in prison because of the brand, and that has nothing to do with this. And his confronting Batman as he's trying to steal kryptonite is a coincidence. Superman doesn't know about the kryptonite, or even what it is yet. Maybe he's figured out Bruce's Batman already because of Alfred in the earpiece at Lex's mansion, and there seems to be no range limit on his super hearing. But all those detective scenes seem like they're supposed to lead somewhere, and all they really do is cement Superman's distaste for Batman's motives. At least the detective work Batman does culminates in the information he finds that he does something with. Oh, and there's something these guys have in common the movie could have really run with. Despite their different worldviews and crime-fighting tactics, they're both great investigators. That's a thing that doesn't come up nearly enough in stories comparing Batman and Superman. Too often, Batman sees Superman as a blunt instrument who never uses his brain to solve problems. But his day job is really similar to Batman's night job, and this movie actually has subplots where they're both doing that. Detective work, and no direct comparison is ever made between them. If Batman and Lex had teamed up initially, like the movie teases earlier, and like I would have loved, detective work would have been a natural way to bring Batman and Superman together. They both discover Lex's true intentions separately, and that puts them on the same side. But yeah, Superman just shows up when the movie wants him to. Don't ask questions about how he knew where Batman was, or why he doesn't arrive until after Batman flattens like a dozen people. The look of surprise on Batman's face inside the Batmobile, in slow motion, to Zimmer's insane operatic score, is maybe the most unintentionally funny shot in the whole movie. He's one of the darkest iterations of Batman put on screen, and he's pushing 50, but he looks like a little kid who just got caught stealing a candy bar. And then, this supposedly inspiring hero uses Batman-esque intimidation tactics on Batman. Superman rips off the top of his car. He says, "The Bat is dead. Bury it." This is all ridiculous to me, because Superman seems like such a hypocrite in this scene. Again, if he's so much better than Batman, he should really be focusing his energies on repairing his reputation. And as much as I'd like an actual discussion, I get that Superman thinks Batman is the bad guy. The movie certainly thinks he is too at this point. But why is he talking like the entitled god he doesn't want to be seen as? Consider this mercy? Really? If he thinks Batman's a dangerous criminal, why doesn't he just grab him and take him to the police? He's simultaneously giving Batman special treatment just because he's wearing a costume and acting like king of the world. And then Batman's trailer fodder line, "Do you bleed? You will." When I first heard the premise and title for this movie, I was concerned it might be handled in a somewhat immature way, but I could never have prepared myself for that. Do Snyder and these writers think the people they're trying to impress with this ostensibly profound modern superhero deconstruction are the same people they're buttering up for a testosterone-laden MMA cage match? Or is it more of a something for everyone kind of movie? Because if it's the second thing, the fight fans don't need to show up until the 2-hour mark. And if you only came to see these guys duke it out, why do you need to watch a whole movie? There are YouTube channels for this sort of thing now, like Bat in the Sun's Superpower Beatdown. Some of those fan film fights have great production values and are less predictable because you know who's gonna win this, right? Like, before you even turn the movie on. The victor in a superhero fight that has to lead to their being friends at the end is always no one. The kryptonite is delivered to Lex, and he and Mercy look at it in ecstasy. Lex looks like he's being hypnotized by it. He finally has the power to bring down the personification of power that is all good. I don't know how he plans to use it though, and I never will, because Batman's about to steal it, and then he will either go on with 2 new plans simultaneously, or 2 plans he always had in his back pocket: Batman v Superman and Doomsday. Some viewers have suggested that Lex wanted Batman to steal the kryptonite, and I wondered about that for a long time too. But later, the look on his face when he sees the kryptonite is stolen suggests to me that he did not want that to happen. If that was his plan, why would his men give Batman so much resistance when he's trying to steal it with the Batmobile? Meanwhile, Lois brings Swanwick the bullet she found in the desert and tells him he should have it analyzed if he doesn't think Superman is a murderer. He takes it without comment. Everything about this subplot seems easily timed, so that she gets her proof of a conspiracy too late for it to mean anything when the Senate chamber blows up. Senator Finch gives her press conference urging Superman to come to the hearing, so he can explain what happened in the desert and so they can have the, quote, conversation about what is good, because that's not a unilateral decision. She really likes the word unilateral. Somehow, even though this senator is arguing against Superman's absolute sense of morality, he ends up looking like the more cynical between them. I don't know how that's even possible. Clark watches this on TV in the newsroom looking conflicted. That's Henry Cavill's job in this role. Just have an uncertain look on your face all the time. He could have avoided at least some of this distrust, as I said earlier, if he just spoke out in the first place. Instead, he goes to his mother for guidance, and she gives him the worst advice possible, or at least the most useless. She says, be their monument or be none of it. You don't owe this world a thing. That's a little entitled and irresponsible. I kind of get the sentiment. Yes, Clark is a human being, and he should be allowed to live life on his own terms and to pursue his own dreams, like anyone, regardless of whatever abilities he possesses. If she had said that to him in high school, I'd maybe understand it. But he does owe a scared and confused world something, an explanation. He is Superman already, after all. They think he's taking the law into his own hands, just like he's accusing Batman of. These Kents did not raise Clark with the values Snyder says they did. It kind of makes sense he doesn't have that strong moral center and sense of responsibility because of that. But Man of Steel didn't understand that, and neither does this movie. And it's a lot harder to make me care about a kidnapped Martha Kent later when she gives such terrible advice. I wish she'd left it at be anything they need you to be. I remember watching the trailer, and I was surprised when that line continued on. He set himself up as either a savior or a big scary question mark, depending on who he's affected. He started making his bed, and now it's time he tucked in the sheets and fluffed up the pillows. I wish he said something like that. A parent with traditional hometown values would say, keep your promises, or be straight with people. But she basically just says, do something, anything. Which is what the viewer should be saying. Come on, man, be proactive already. But not his mom. I also understand the maternal protection instinct when she says, I never wanted the world to have you, but the follow-through is all wrong. They do have him now, and no, Martha, they don't know who he is when they see what he does. Yeah, actions speak louder than words, but that doesn't mean the words aren't important. Sometimes they provide context. That's like the show don't tell thing in fiction. Like, generally that's a good rule, but it's hyperbolic to say you should always show and never tell. It's the same thing with actions and explanations. Sure, people shouldn't trust him because he says he's the good guy and follow him blindly, but he's not giving them any sense of his character. Investigation subplot 3 out of 3 finally pays off when Swanwick brings Lois's bullet back to her and says the CIA thinks Superman was framed for murder because the metal was developed by LexCorp. Swanwick won't go on record because it's classified, and she thinks she's sunk. But when she starts to ask how Lex's thugs knew Clark would be in the desert, just like I asked, we flash back to the moment Superman saved her, which implies she knows she's the key to this. But just because the bad guys somehow know Superman would show up to save her if she was in danger, how could they possibly know he'd figure out where she is? If the frame-up hinges on him showing up, that doesn't seem like an ironclad way to get him there. Maybe if you were in Metropolis, it would be easier to swallow, but all the way in Africa? And this whole thing has to be stretched to right now, so Lois can find out Superman was framed right before the Senate hearing. But also too late to do anything about it, even though she weirdly tries. We'll talk about that in a minute. Keith, the paraplegic man, uses his disability to try to change people's minds about Superman in a television interview right before the Senate hearing. His perspective is certainly valid, but the performance is so over the top, it's hard to feel very sorry for him. Even for a guy that's supposed to have lost it, the writing here is way too melodramatic. I don't have a problem with the way his character is handled conceptually. Like so much in this movie, it's a good idea, just handled with no finesse. I desperately need to see the debate this is building up to. No one gets the chance to rebut this guy, and he kind of loses by the end just because the discussion never happens and Superman dies a hero. Keith says Superman is not a hero, but it's clearly more complicated than that. For a lot of people, he absolutely is. The question is, at what cost? While the movie never comes down on whether Superman is really crossing any moral lines beyond collateral damage, it does, by the end, seem to have the attitude that Superman did the right thing when he fought Zod, and it's just tragic that people died, but there was nothing he could do about it, cementing his morality. And perhaps he couldn't do much more than he did, but he's very careless in those fights, going all the way back to the Smallville scenes. The idea is apparently that everything else he was accused of was all untrue. Keith and Bruce both have legitimate grievances about Superman, and the movie initially seems to be presenting this as a complex, hard-to-call conundrum, but won't follow through on it. Wouldn't it be more engaging and thought-provoking to see Superman debate this guy at the hearing, than to have an explosion and make Superman all conflicted about whether he should even act at all? He might as well be Al Simmons from Spawn. Everything he does seems begrudging, and he just waits around until he's forced to finally do something, only to run off again when things get bad. You're from space, Superman, not hell. And actually getting that Senate hearing would help me decide where I stand with this version of Superman, too. Heck, I don't have to rewrite the movie, just have this much-needed conversation before the explosion happens. I know I'm a broken record, but why isn't Superman ever allowed to talk in these movies? Maybe he'll suddenly get a lot more dialogue when he comes back from the dead in the Snyder Cut of Justice League, now that there's no question about how heroic he's supposed to be. But I doubt it. Lois calls Perry at the planet and tries to get him to run the story about the fringe job in Africa before the Senate hearing starts, but Perry doesn't think she has enough proof. Yeah, he gave Clark the "we can't worry about morality" speech earlier, but his argument here is sound. He says Lex will sue the paper out of existence if they can't back up her claims. Lois says if they can get the story out now, though, it might change what Superman says? I don't understand that at all. Wouldn't she expect Superman to just tell the truth? Regardless, it might lend credibility to his position that he just rescued his girlfriend, and despite the excessive force, nobody got hurt because of him, and he wasn't there to interfere in foreign affairs at all. That is, of course, if anyone had time to read the article. Finch is on her way into the Senate chamber while Lois is on the phone, so I don't get how she thinks she has time to write a story and get it in a newspaper and have anyone find out about it before Superman speaks. Also, I don't think we've had another scene between Lois and Clark since the bathtub. Shouldn't they be comparing notes? Why don't they check in with each other? Where's the scene where Clark tells her about Batman and she tells him about her suspicions with the bullet? And wait a minute, I forgot Clark and Superman are the same person again because the movie keeps forgetting that. But doesn't Clark have a cell phone? Lois doesn't try to call him and tell him what she found out. She is his world, but they seem to communicate as infrequently as this movie does to its audience. How is the film so long with so many necessary scenes missing? Also, Lois doesn't even know if Superman is going to be there because they haven't talked about it. And nobody knows if he's going to be there. But she's talking like she just assumes he'll show up. And like everybody does that, except for Finch. And again, it watches to me like she thinks this guy is Christopher Reeve. So maybe she would just think that. But if I were her, I'd call him to see how he plans to handle it, at the very least. It watches like there should be an even longer cut beyond this. The universe had mercy on my soul for not making that a reality. But this looks like the Watchmen director's cut, which is more complete, but like there's even one more super long version beyond that. Maybe that exists in a parallel universe, and it also had a series of animated scenes that keep interrupting the narrative with a totally different story in a different genre, but with obvious thematic parallels, like the Black Freighter. This one would just be an animated ripoff of The Passion of the Christ. Then Lex talks to Finch and pretends like he's planning on telling the committee that she wouldn't fund a deterrent against Superman. Because remember, he's about to blow up the chamber. I'm not sure why he even showed up there. I mean, she's gonna get his message that he's the reason she's about to die with the peach tea on her desk at the hearing. And he's gone through the trouble to have a seat reserved that he doesn't plan on being in. Wouldn't a better alibi be just being at home or at work? I mean, there's no real reason anyone should suspect Lex, I guess, unless somebody knew he gave Keith the wheelchair he plants a bomb in, or makes a bomb out of, I guess we're told later, but his presence wouldn't affect that. He's risking she'll put two and two together faster, maybe, since she just saw him and has to be really paranoid and kind of afraid of him even being in the building after his maniacal speech at his house. And why does he let his assistant Mercy die? And now, the thing with Keith's checks. I am completely baffled on this point, and I've gone over and over it trying to determine what is really happening here. Bruce looks in on Keith's situation after he sees him on CNN. Remember, he worked for Bruce when he was injured in Metropolis, and Bruce already feels responsible for the people in his employ he was powerless to save, in his mind, thanks to Superman. He discovers that Keith has sent back all the checks his company issued to Keith from the Victims Fund. They all have angry, handwritten, melodramatic notes blaming Bruce for what happened to him. Bruce asks the money guy why Keith hasn't been getting the checks. It turns out he has, but they were always sent back, and no one bothered to tell Bruce about it. I've been trying to figure out for a long time whether this is supposed to be part of Lex's plot, because I can't figure out what he actually did, but I've determined it has to be, because when Lex gives his rambling speech on the roof and reveals his master plan to Superman, he says it did not take much time to push him over, actually, referring to Bruce. Lex says Bruce's hate was 2 years growing, and he quotes the last message we'll see from Keith later, "You let your family die." So either Lex stopped Keith's checks from getting to him, and Lex wrote all the notes himself, and then made sure Bruce got them all at once on the day of the Senate hearing, or Keith sent all the checks back and wrote the messages himself, but Lex intercepted them and made sure Bruce got them all at once. or it was incompetence on the part of someone in Bruce's company that he never saw the checks. Lex wrote the messages, but wanted Bruce to get them one at a time, which makes more sense if he's trying to make Bruce hate Superman gradually over time. But that didn't work until today, when Bruce conveniently finally investigates Keith and finds the big bundle of checks. I don't understand whether Lex has been trying to make this fight happen going all the way back to the World Engine, which would mean he wants them to fight before he even knows kryptonite exists. Or Lex might just mean Bruce has been spiraling for 2 years, so that made it easy to push him over the edge when he finally decided to do this now. And I think that's maybe more likely. But either way, this is about as convoluted as it gets. Not to mention, it makes it really clear Lex did indeed want Batman and Superman to fight before Batman had kryptonite. I can't tell what Lex wants more, Superman dead or Superman humiliated. Maybe the point is he doesn't know either, and that's why this plan is the biggest headache I have ever tried to make sense of. He is obsessed with contradictions, but his plan is riddled with them. That could kind of be cool if it's on purpose, but it doesn't work because I'm pretty sure the movie doesn't know how crazy he is either. And I think it's trying to impress me later on the roof with how brilliant a master manipulator he is. Just give me a minute. Gotta go get an Advil. Okay, so then Lex talks to Finch one last time and gives her probably the most important thematic line of the piece. Do you know the oldest lie in America, Senator? It's that power can be innocent. I like that as the crux of the film. That's a great modern idea to explore in a Superman movie. Lex uses that widely held belief to justify the way he wields power, and Superman tries to prove the opposite, amidst a sea of doubt and suspicion. And despite all the pacing issues and the convoluted villain plot and the forced-in premonition of a dystopian future, if Superman came to that hearing and we had a really well-written debate about this whole thing for like 10 minutes, it could have covered a multitude of sins for me. I can't help but imagine how intriguing that could have been. And again, there's a V in the title like a courtroom drama. I said before the movie came out, well, obviously that's just a big punch fest. There's no way it's a double entendre and actually an ideological debate in something like a courtroom setting. And the movie actually teases me with that very scenario. I'm starting to wonder if the scenes leading up to the Senate hearing are even linear or happening around the same time, as the progression of scenes would suggest. If Superman is dropping down to the Senate building, apparently he just hovered above it for a long time because we're told he's up there a couple scenes earlier. KG Beast murders the African woman who lied for Lex earlier but has had a change of heart since, so that she can't testify at the hearing. He kills her by throwing her in front of a train at a train station, with tons of people crowded around him, by the way. I don't know how he could get out of there without getting mobbed and arrested. But would she even have had time to show up to the Senate building? I mean, how long is that hearing? I imagine a lot shorter if Superman didn't show up, and no one knows if he's even going to be there. So there's no way she would know how long it's supposed to be. Yeah, she's making it a real priority if she's just now getting on the train as the meeting is supposed to start. But even more confounding is why it was so urgent for Lex to have that loose end tied up right then anyway. He's planning to blow up the Senate chamber with Finch, who was the woman's contact. Sure, maybe he's concerned she'll go tell somebody else, but the placement of that scene, shortly after Finch is talking about the African woman testifying, implies that Lex needs that done before a hearing he's about to stop anyway. He has a lot of confusing plans within plans, and sure, you can make up theories to kind of explain stuff like this away. Maybe it's just insurance in case the bomb doesn't go off for some reason, or Superman manages to stop it in time. But it watches to me like a mess of scenes that were all shot and the order they'd go in was decided later. We've got a lot of intrigue we're supposed to be mystified by in the moment, but seems like it's lacking in forethought or basic story logic when you start thinking about it at all. As Superman drops down to the building, we see protesters holding typical political signs, with messages like Earth belongs to humans, and aliens are un-American, and Westboro Baptist Church type signs like God hates aliens. Gotta get a reference to that crazy cult in there if you're gonna have a demonstration of bigots in your movie, of course. But they might not all be intolerant jerk faces. Some of those signs say, tell us the truth about aliens, which sure is maybe a little insensitive, but it's fair to ask Superman to tell the truth. Nobody really knows anything about him. It's also weird that there are like 2 pro-Superman signs in with all the anti-Superman signs. Even if there's a designated area for protesters outside the building, I'd think one group would stand together as far apart from the other group as they could get, or at least on the other side of them. And again, this is an image I expected to see the movie open with. And it's weird it takes the Africa incident before we have any inclination of this sort of thing. Senator Finch opens the hearing by thanking Superman for showing up, and she looks as frustrated as I am that he's so non-communicative. She says, "This is how a democracy works. We talk to each other. We act by the consent of the governed." He looks like he's walking into the principal's office. He knows how the process works, but the movie, in scenes like this, presents Superman as if he was raised on Krypton and just arrived on Earth a year and a half ago. And it just kind of hurts my feelings to see a politician have to remind Superman how important truth is. Sure, he hasn't been lying about anything, but of course people are suspicious, and he would have engendered some goodwill if he had just spoken publicly as soon as people started accusing him of shadow interventions. Now, if the idea is that Clark was raised wrong, and he's not Superman yet, but all of this is going to teach him how to get there, I don't really want that. I don't love that idea. It's too much of that thing where you've got a prequel masquerading as the real thing, where your hero can't be the thing you came to see until the very end of the second or third movie. But I would at least understand who he is, and would think there might be hope that at some point he'll finally be the real Superman. But we're going to kill him in this movie. So I guess at this point my only hope is Superman is finally Superman after death. Finch stammers as she tries to get through her opening statement because she slowly turns a jar sitting on a coaster in front of her, and I like the tension in this moment, but I'm too confused by everything to be quite on the edge of my seat the way Snyder expects me to be. She slowly turns the jar filled with dark yellow liquid to reveal a handwritten label that says, of course, Granny's Peach Tea. I don't know what's actually in the jar, and I guess I don't care. On a first viewing, as soon as I realized what that is, I was distracted by 2 things. A, trying to remember what that whole peach tea thing was about in the first place, because it's been so long since it happened, and it was such a jarring thing to put in a mainstream superhero movie, I was weirded out by it before I was appreciating the thematic implications. And B, trying to understand how security in the Capitol is so lax. Someone put that there without anyone noticing or being suspicious of it. And who did Lex have do that anyway? Did he walk in there when no one was looking? Was that Mercy's only job today? And her last one, since she's about to die in a fiery blaze with everyone else, despite being a totally loyal assistant and doing whatever morally deplorable thing Lex asks her to do. It took a couple viewings, but I understand the peach tea thing now. Lex is sadistically letting Finch know something horrible is about to happen by using her own metaphor for something obviously being something else against her. That's not peach tea, and there's something in that room that isn't as it seems either. She'll never know what exactly that is, but it's Keith's wheelchair, which is about to explode. So the explosion happens, and it's certainly a surprise, but it doesn't have the impact on me it should because I'm already so bewildered. Then Superman stands in slow motion, completely internalizing everything, seeming to already be formulating his plan to give up completely. Yeah, he's sad, he's racked with guilt, he still doesn't know what to do, but it's like I'm supposed to still be waiting for him to become Superman at some point. I thought this guy compulsively saved people. That's what we're told in Man of Steel. How is Superman not flying around, making sure there are no survivors he could rescue? It's another scene that seemed lifted from Watchmen, except Superman isn't actually responsible for killing everyone in this room like Dr. Manhattan, but his cold reaction is a lot like that, and his solution will be similar too. He also runs away like Dr. Manhattan. In a minute, we'll see him rescue a woman, a moment that's not in the theatrical cut, so that helps a little. But it's token, and his first reaction wasn't dart everywhere and save whoever you can, and he's not using his X-ray vision to look for survivors. Kind of weird, by the way. In a movie where Superman's X-ray vision is a huge plot point, I don't think we ever see him utilize it. This moment watches like the movie forgot Superman is supposed to save people, not just brood, and was shot and thrown in there later. Bruce gets one more message, apparently from Keith, this time on a newspaper clipping from the day the Zod fight happened, saying, "You let your family die," and he stares at the TV showing the carnage at the Capitol, furious it seems, at Superman. What does Bruce think is happening in that moment? That Superman went to the Capitol to blow it up when it's pretty obvious an actual bomb went off? Or that he's complicit in it in some way? Maybe not, I just don't know. But he's got this look like he thinks he's dealing with the Martians from Mars attacks here. Again, this is all overkill. Bruce doesn't need any more motivation to go after Superman, any more than Lex needs to do 90% of what he does to turn them against each other. It's like Snyder just keeps pouring sugar into his Kool-Aid. Like, nah, it's good, man. Let's check in, once again, with Lex's nonsensical plan. He's got kryptonite. He wants the government to weaponize it. They won't, because one senator won't give him permits he needs. Apparently, he can't just find somebody else who will. So he kills Finch in public, presumably also hoping to make Superman look bad. Sort of killing two birds with one stone. Continuing to ruin the god's reputation so he won't be a hero to the people when he dies. But he's already killed the only person who knows he's framed and trying to kill Superman, that he knows of, because he doesn't know about Lois and the Bullet. And Lex has got the public at least unsure of Superman now, because somehow this actually works and people think that Superman was involved. I don't know why anyone would be suspicious of him unless he flew off without making a statement, which he does. But that's not the only reason that they're suspicious, and we'll talk about that in a minute. If I'm Lex, maybe put kryptonite in the wheelchair? If it kills him, great. If not, no one can trace it back to Lex or would even know what it is, and then he's done a field test. I would really like to know how he planned to use the kryptonite before it was stolen. But I guess he always wanted Batman and Superman to fight, so he was going to turn people even more against Superman when he murders Batman and then finally use kryptonite against him? Is that why he doesn't use it in the wheelchair? Superman has to be totally vilified first? If so, why not frame him for more catastrophes like Africa, instead of hoping everyone will blame him for a bombing just because he has superpowers and maybe could have stopped it? It seems pretty flimsy and impossible to predict that outcome, like most everything else in this plan. Then we got Alfred chopping wood like Kirk in Star Trek Generations. He watches the news and learns about the explosion with a news anchor who says Superman leaving the scene raises suspicions. Now people are even more afraid of Superman. I guess the only thing he can do to turn around public opinion on him now is die in an epic sacrifice. And now Batman has Lex's kryptonite, which he steals off-screen after tearing up LexCorp, and after we watch 10 minutes of him mowing people down in his Batmobile to get it and fail because Superman showed up for no reason out of nowhere. That seems pretty easy, and Batman clearly doesn't care about stealth because he left the Batarang as a calling card. So why not just do it this way in the first place, like I suggested earlier? So much wasted screen time. I know I complained this hard-edged action movie has hardly any action for the first hour and 15 minutes, but action scenes should progress the narrative, or the story is just there to facilitate the fights and car chases. So why not just give us this scene, immediately after Batman decrypts the files and learns what kryptonite is? Sure, you wouldn't get Batman and Superman's first meeting, but that doesn't have any real bearing on the narrative either. I have never done a fan edit, but I seriously think I could get this movie down to an hour and a half and make it more cohesive and coherent. I just take out most of what it thinks is the plot. Lex does not look happy that Batman stole his kryptonite, which makes it impossible to understand why he's already been trying to maneuver Superman to fight Batman. What chance does Batman have against Superman before he has kryptonite? Unless Lex also wants Batman dead, like he's putting him in the metahuman category. Maybe he doesn't know Batman is just a man in a cape and assumes he has powers, so he figures he'll take some of those metahumans out while he's orchestrating Superman's demise. I mean, why else would he have files on the other metahumans? But then he doesn't have a file on Batman, along with Wonder Woman and the rest, so probably not. Maybe he didn't bother to make one just because he's sad he didn't get to make Batman a logo, since he's got one already. It seems like he must have made Wonder Woman and Flash and Aquaman and Cyborg's logos for them. Thanks to one of our viewers, Tank Gunner, for pointing that one out. Lois hasn't bothered to check in with Clark by phone this whole movie, but she finally tries after the Senate catastrophe, only to find him standing on her balcony. Superman is completely hopeless, feeling sorry for himself, and he decides the idea of Superman is a sham. I hate everything about this scene. He says he's afraid he didn't see the bomb because he wasn't looking. Okay? What does that mean? That he's worried he didn't care enough about the people there to take every precaution for their safety? Or that he just sucks at being a superhero? God, what is this CW Arrow and Supergirl writing? Lois tries to tell him what she knows about the conspiracy, but of course, he doesn't listen to her, because if he did that, he might come to his senses and go after Lex, the ostensible master planner who has the public about to come after him with pitchforks, instead of flying off to wallow in self-pity. Man, it really is depressing when a Superman movie feels more like a Spawn movie. Hey Superman, I'm afraid you didn't hear Lois because you aren't listening. Superman says he's been living his life the way his father saw it. I guess he means the dream Jonathan had when he saw his son using a red towel for a cape in the backyard, where he could use his abilities using a disguise and still have a life. I still don't understand when his father thought he would be ready to do that. And then he says, Superman was never real. This is his Spider-Man No More moment, where he decides the consequences to his superhero action are too great, and he has to stop. Like he wanted to be the symbol for hope, like the S on his chest, but the world wouldn't let him. I don't know, man, maybe you should have just tried harder to look like one of the people that just happened to have abilities nobody else did, instead of looking as alien as people are afraid you are. It's like he doesn't get the basic concept of communication. He's not even communicating with Lois in this scene. With all his power, he's powerless to control his own life and not just let things happen to him. Until his big Jesus moment at the end, because if he acts rationally, the movie doesn't know how to create dramatic situations where people hate him and Batman has to fight him. Even though it already has that dramatic situation from the end of last movie and established it right away. This is the absolute antithesis to character-driven fiction. I wish Lois went farther than that farmer's dream is all some people have. He shouldn't keep just doing what he's been doing. He needs to address why people have turned on him and expose Lex. She's talking to him too much on his own terms here. She should have led with, but you can do something about it. None of this is your fault, and we can prove it. She's making it all about the symbol of hope, when the problem is entirely practical. She's trying to save the day with a platitude. He says the crest meant something on his world, but his world doesn't exist anymore. Ugh. It means whatever example you set, and if you just listen to what Lois was trying to tell you, you'd know someone was trying to manipulate that. Lois's side of this would be more understandable if she was as clueless as he was about what was going on. But she knows why people are less hopeful about Superman. She should be desperate to make him understand so Lex can't get away with it, and so more people won't be put in danger. Simple conversation could have ended this movie early at least a couple times. And of course, we've already killed off the only character interested in talking halfway through the movie. I have this problem with a bunch of this movie, but this is one of the worst examples. I just don't feel like I'm looking at human beings here. It might be the worst written scene next to the Martha moment. Lex finally, an hour after he gets access to the ship, uses Zod's fingerprints to get inside. This scene should either be a lot earlier in the movie, or else Lex shouldn't have even thought to try to get his hands on the ship until now. This whole thing is way less convoluted if this is plainly a backup plan he thinks of because he lost his kryptonite. Which I think is what it is, and the main reason I'm convinced Lex didn't secretly want Batman to steal his kryptonite. But why wouldn't he take advantage of the ship before now? Imagine you find a politician willing to give you exclusive rights to enter and use the only alien spaceship known to exist on the planet. Wouldn't you be too curious to not take a peek immediately? I can't imagine just leaving it there. And again, the man has no idea what's in the ship or if he'll even be able to exploit it. He apparently waits until he needs another weapon to kill Superman with and hopes there's something in there he can use. That would be like waiting past Christmas to open an enormous present you got. Wait until your car broke down and finally take the wrapping paper off, hoping for a motorcycle. It's weird not just that Lex knows Zod's fingerprints will get him in the ship, but that's what you need instead of a Kryptonian key. I guess because there's not one of those laying around, so how's Lex going to get his hands on one? But then there is a Kryptonian key in the ship, and Lex is lucky it's in the slot when he walks in, or he wouldn't be able to access anything. He pulls it out and then shoves it back in. I'm not sure it would occur to me to even do that, just like I wouldn't immediately know I would need Zod's fingerprints. He's interfacing with the ship now, and a computer voice asks him if he'd like to assume command. He says he would, and just like that, he's in command, even though it's clear the ship knows he's not Zod or one of his crew. It will become even more evident a little later that we're dealing with an artificial intelligence and not an automated computer, maybe like a disembodied voice version of the Jor-El hologram. But even here, it has to know Lex isn't Zod because it tells him things Zod would know. And of course, a little later, it's also going to say his name. It's like Lex has tapped into the evil Fortress of Solitude, because like the Fortress in the Donner Superman movies, it wants to give him all the knowledge of the known universe right away. The ship tells him it has knowledge from 100,000 different worlds. Instead of saying, how do I kill a Kryptonian on this planet, or I need a Power Rangers monster that's really hard to kill, Lex says, teach me, which is another one of those dramatic but totally impractical movie tropes. He doesn't have time to listen to the ship tell him everything it knows, and it doesn't seem to directly download his brain with information or anything. I'm also not sure why the ship is speaking to him in English, but I guess Jor-El does that with Clark in the first movie, and Zod and his people knew English, so I'll give it that. But it adds to the ridiculous idea that anyone could walk into that ship and assume command, regardless of rank or even species, as long as you could get inside in the first place. The scout ship, apparently, has the US Capitol's level of security. I do like the moodiness and mysterious ambiance of this scene, with the return of Zimmer's Krypton theme from Man of Steel. I'm so nostalgic for the relative simplicity of that movie the more I watched this. Yeah, I said I gave it too much credit, even as critical as I was of that movie when I reviewed it, but all of that film's confusion and poor communication pales in comparison to this. And I still love the nature-nurture and free will versus predestination questions inherent in the Krypton stuff there. But the biggest thing that movie has over this is just a consistent tone. I've spent so much time on this, I'm starting to forget what it's like to put in one movie and only get one movie. Next, a montage of Bruce weight training, a la Oliver Queen in Arrow, except 5 times more over the top, with no salmon ladder but lots of tires, and that's intercut with him refining and creating weapons out of kryptonite. Alfred is there watching all of this, staring disapprovingly, but going along with it, maybe because Bruce is such a loose cannon? Who knows what he'd do if Alfred left? Or maybe just because he made Bruce a promise to stick with him no matter what. I'm not sure why. We don't talk about it. I don't actually expect the movie to talk about anything at this point. Why start now? I remember people making fun of this scene profusely, and I never understood why. All the excessive weight dropping and the shots to Affleck's crazy ripped abs is over the top, but I think people specifically thought the tires were silly. People use all kinds of stuff when they're working out. I don't know. This is one of the most ADD movies I think I've ever seen. It cannot keep its eye on the ball because it has too many goals and it hardly tries to marry them organically. It's like a kid who's forced to give a speech in class about the Civil War, but the Civil War bores him and what he really wants to talk about is Pokemon. So he'll go on about General Grant for a while and then he'll sneak in an unrelated sentence or two about Snorlax or Charizard and then he'll go right back to Grant. No segue, no thematic parallel, just intrusive diversion to another subject for a minute. That's what Bruce suddenly clicking on the Wonder Woman file from Lex's archive is like. As I said earlier, I think this scene should be right after Nightmare Batman, and I think it needs to introduce all the future League members at the same time. Or at least Flash. He's putting the finishing touches on his kryptonite arsenal. We're thinking about the big showdown we assume is more imminent than it is. Because this movie works on Brian Michael Bendis time, but without all that pesky character dimension and realistic dialogue. And suddenly, I have to shift gears back to the freaking metahuman thesis nonsense again. The only thing that makes this relevant to the story in this movie, besides trying desperately to make Wonder Woman less shoved in at the end, is to inform Lex's motivations. He's not just worried about Superman. He wants to get rid of everyone who might appear godlike. I guess he figured he'd take out the most powerful one first, so Superman couldn't come after him when he starts picking off the weaker metahumans. This might feel more cohesive if it somehow led Bruce to Lex's grander scheme, and he realized Superman wasn't the immediate threat. But it's just a quick distraction on his way to try to murder Superman. Bruce sees Wonder Woman in the picture she'll take in her own movie a year after this, during World War I, and it introduces that hard rock guitar, jungle beat, Junkie XL Wonder Woman theme that movie tried its best to work in organically. which is also just intrusive and weird here. We cut right back to Lex in the ship, and I assume we broke this into 2 scenes to denote the passage of time, and so the audience will be too distracted by all the subplot bouncing to notice that the first thing we hear in this scene makes no sense. The ship says, "Alexander Luthor, your security override has been accepted." And then it's ready to analyze Zod's body. The computer has already accepted Lex as the commander of the vessel. Why does he need an override? How did he get the override? What is he even overriding? It's like it's just there because it sounds like a thing computers say in sci-fi movies. Lex puts Zod's body in the water, which plays like a creepy, perverse baptism. Then he cuts his hand and puts his own blood in the water. Lex is almost in tears, and not just because he just took a knife to his hand. He says, "You flew too close to the sun." Like he sees Zod as a tragic figure. But Zod's not Icarus, defying the gods with his hubris. Zod is a god on the same level as Superman. At least, if you think he's a god. The only thing I can figure is that Lex doesn't have a problem with someone who is ultra-powerful, even if they're more powerful than he is, even if they want to terraform the Earth and commit genocide against humanity, as long as they're not a walking contradiction. Man, I don't think Lex would be able to get through watching his own movie. It watches like Lex is sad Zod is dead because he's a fellow comic book villain. I guess now they can never be in a Legion of Doom together. Single tear. The ship tells Lex that mixing his blood with Zod's to create a rage monster is forbidden by the Council of Krypton. Well, that seems sensible. Probably the first law I'd put in place if I ruled a planet. I'm assuming Lex got this idea from the Kryptonian archives. Otherwise, I don't know how he'd even think to put the body of a dead Kryptonian in some water and drip his own blood on it to make Doomsday. It's also weird, though, if the computer gave him step-by-step directions, let him try it, and then said, "Wait, no, you can't do that. That's forbidden." And also, why does the ship need human blood to turn Zod into a monster? The AI says none will ever again give life to a deformity so hateful to sight and memory, the desecration without name, implying this has been done to make something like Doomsday before. Was it human blood mixed with Krypton blood when this was done on Krypton? Or can you do it with anyone's blood mixed with a dead body? And wouldn't it have been a lot weaker and less destructive on Krypton, since the body would effectively just be human without the indestructible skin or any of his powers? Lex is performing some kind of occult ritual, masquerading as genetic engineering, and I just don't understand what is even happening. But somehow, the scene gets even more bizarre, and we get the 3 C's of lazy storytelling all at once. I don't know if I've ever seen this unholy trinity like this in the same scene before. Lex getting the recipe for an abomination, a doomsday monster, after a few minutes of the computer teaching him things is convenient. What the recipe actually is convoluted, and also contrived. But what happens next is insanely contrived. Lex outlogics an artificial intelligence Kirk style by simply reminding it that the governing body that made the "don't make monsters" rule is dead now. So the ship is like, "Oh, good call, sure, commencing doomsday oven now, sir." What? Again, it does seem like a thinking machine that can maybe learn and adapt, but it's still a programmed machine. It could have been built to not let anyone do this, no matter what the circumstances are. But even if the AI is completely self-aware and has free will, it seems like it's supposed to be a logical being. And it doesn't make sense to allow this just because the civilization that put the rules in place are dead. I could just as easily see it say, "You're right, Alexander Luthor, the ruling council is destroyed, and I served the council, therefore I serve no purpose and will now go offline," and then shut itself down forever. But it watches like Lex is supposed to be outthinking a programmed machine, but we're rushing this just to hurry up and get Doomsday cooking. Perhaps this senseless AI is somehow the product of a sterile, passionless, isolationist society that lived on generations longer than it should have. Or maybe it's the result of a thoughtless script that wants to sound smart but hopes the audience won't pay too much attention to what's happening. Here's an idea. Why not make the creating of a monster forbidden? It could just be a theoretical thing the ship tells Lex some scientist came up with eons back, but never actually went through with it, and Lex finds it with a keyword search or something, rather than it just luckily being one of the first few things the ship told him about, and create unnecessarily confusing background for Krypton. When we cut back to the Daily Planet again, Jenny is reading copy about how everything Superman is doing is suspicious. Because it is. His disappearance raises questions, she says. But before that, she reads, I don't know who wrote this article, pretty sure she's not a reporter, but I don't know. If Superman was aware of the threat and did nothing, was he then complicit in the Capitol tragedy? His leaving, still without saying anything, should definitely raise eyebrows, but suggesting Superman might have known about it and did nothing to stop it sounds like a mainstream news outlet printing a conspiracy theory. I don't get how anyone makes that leap. You've got nothing to go on with Superman at all, and that's the problem. If I was writing an article, my headline would be, "Is Superman mute?" or "Cat got his tongue." It's like the Jon Stewart thing, not the Green Lantern, the Daily Show host, who said Superman doesn't want to be thought of as an American 40 minutes ago. It feels like scenes informed by other scenes we never get. This scene also watches like Superman just brooded for a minute after the Capitol bombing and then flew off like he does in the theatrical cut, as if it doesn't know he tried to save people, although not as urgently as one might hope. CNN reports that investigators and regular citizens alike are questioning why Superman did nothing to stop the bombing. The anchor says he has nearly unlimited power, and people are now chanting burn him," because he survived and didn't stop it. So they think because he can fly, has heat vision, is indestructible, etc., he's omnipotent? Also can't really burn him if he's omnipotent. At the risk of beating a dead horse, if I'm Superman, I would give an interview like Christopher Reeve's Superman did and tell everyone what my powers are. Though maybe not mention I can't see through lead. I can see why people would be confused as to what exactly he can do if they don't trust him. He hasn't displayed any powers beyond the traditional ones in the last year and a half he's been public, but that doesn't mean he isn't holding out, of course. At the same time, it's weird that people just assume he must be all-powerful. Maybe they know about his X-ray vision and wonder why he didn't use it, but then they should be talking specifically about that. I don't know if X-ray vision is public knowledge. The question should be, why didn't he see it? Just like Superman himself wonders in that scene with Lois. If he wanted that to happen, what was the point of his going there? A lot fewer people would probably blame him if he was nowhere around. And it's ridiculous people are talking about Superman like he's omnipotent also, because General Zod is the same kind of being he is, and he's dead. I don't know why this didn't occur to me earlier. Why is Lex worried about kryptonite when he could just try to find something powerful enough to snap Superman's neck? In a later report revealing that Keith had bomb-making materials in his apartment, the suspicion against Superman is mounting exponentially. Now a reporter says all roads in the investigation lead to Superman. Perry, now would be a good time to publish that story Lois wants to write about the frame job. It's weird Lois doesn't implore him again to do that. Things are getting dire enough, maybe this would be enough to get him to take the risk and do the right thing. And that would have been a nice little character arc for Perry. He puts business above his principles until his conscience finally wins out, when his paper can finally make a difference again. Another wasted opportunity. Lois investigates Keith's apartment and realizes the bomb-making accoutrement was planted there because he has fresh food in his refrigerator, indicating he didn't know he was going to die. He just got groceries. The police didn't figure that out? I'm starting to think she'd make more of a difference as a cop. And again, I'm wondering how much of what this guy seemed to be doing was actually fabricated by Lex. Did Lex plant all the psychotic writing in his apartment to match what he wrote on the statue and what's on the checks? Or did Lex break into the apartment, see just how fanatical the guy was, and decide to exploit that in forging Keith's handwriting to make the angry messages on the checks Bruce either somehow never got, or that were entirely forged in the first place? Or did Keith write the checks, Lex has intercepted them for years, and the apartment has always looked like this because Keith really was this fanatical? I swear the check thing is going to give me a nervous breakdown. Then, Lois finds out the wheelchair was lined with lead, and that's why Superman couldn't stop it, implying that he definitely would have seen it if it weren't for the lead. Is Superman always using his X-ray vision? Wouldn't he have to purposefully decide to check for bombs or whatever else before he either found the bomb or realized he couldn't see through it because it was lined with lead? Earlier, Superman tells Lois, "Maybe I didn't see it because I wasn't looking." Well, I would think you'd have to be, so it doesn't matter that Lex used lead, because Superman wouldn't have found it anyway. He literally wasn't looking. As I said in part 1, I don't know why anyone knows Superman can't see through lead, but I had forgotten that the woman who checks into the chair for Lois doesn't know about that weakness. She assumes it's lead-lined to reduce the blast for some reason. So now I'm thinking, maybe it isn't common knowledge. Lois might know about it because she's dating Superman, sure, but how does Lex know? He knows Clark is Superman somehow, so maybe he's been watching him all this time. Maybe Lex has got bugs everywhere and has heard Clark and Lois talking about lead. But I don't know. Next, a shot of some mountains begging to be paired with the Paramount logo. It's almost jarring to actually get an establishing shot before a scene in this movie. It happens so rarely. Clark is traversing this crag on a spirit walk to find some kind of clarity, I suppose. In his commentary, Snyder calls this his figurative forces of solitude. Like, it's clever to have Superman walking around in the cold to evoke the imagery of the fortress without really having one. I'm not saying it's fundamentally wrong not to give Superman a fortress, but it's not like this is a super realistic take and the fortress is too silly for this material either. So that seems like a lame idea to me. We finally get in Superman's head, kind of literally, and I don't understand what's going on. He sees a vision of Jonathan Kent, who tells him a story about how good deeds sometimes lead to bad consequences, but you have to do the right thing regardless, and that on its own is what motivates Clark to be Superman again. It also reaffirms that Lois is his world, because Jonathan says that about Martha. It's a horribly fabricated opportunity for change. Couldn't have come from that conversation with Lois, couldn't have come from the Senate explosion itself. Ghost of his father tells him through an allegory that nothing that's happened is his fault, like the collateral damage from Man of Steel and the explosion because he can't control everything, and that he's got Lois, so there's still hope in the world. Realizing he can't control everything is a good lesson for Superman to learn, but whether he's responsible for any of that is debatable, and I thought the fact that the world isn't black and white and it's hard to be Superman in that world was the point. Too bad Jonathan didn't have some allegory about running away from your problems or poor communication. He tells a story about a time there was a big flood on the farm when he was a kid, and he and his father managed to divert the water away and save what they had, but they accidentally sent the water upstream to the Lang farm and killed all their horses. The Langs couldn't get some shovels and do the same thing Jonathan and his father did? I don't know, maybe they were out having Taco Bell or something. That story is vague and flimsy and makes about as much sense as the way the scene was contrived in Man of Steel to get Jonathan killed by a tornado. But if there are farmers that are incompetent enough to not realize that they're about to destroy another farm with where they sent water, it's no wonder they're taking refuge from tornadoes under overpasses. I hate scenes like this. A character who died in the previous movie comes back for a cameo to give the protagonist words of wisdom, and there's no internal logic to explain what we're actually seeing. Spider-Man 2 does it with Uncle Ben, Rise of Skywalker does it with Han Solo. Clark isn't hallucinating because he's not under any kind of influence, nor is he delirious from the cold because he's Superman. The easiest explanation is that it's just visualizing a conversation he's having with himself, but that's a bad idea in a movie that can't relate basic information in straightforward, non-surreal scenes that are definitely happening. And in a movie with several dream sequences and a cryptic premonition brought by a real-life man from the future somehow. And like that sequence, Snyder himself doesn't know what this is. He says that in his commentary too. Could be a ghost, could just be in his head, doesn't matter. Of course it doesn't, because it's just contrived to get Superman to stop feeling sorry for himself so the BVS part can happen in BVS. It's about this time in the movie Jeff Goldblum has to be saying, so you're gonna have Batman fighting Superman in your Batman versus Superman movie, right? It's also strange because if it is just a conversation playing out in Clark's head, he has to know this story Jonathan is telling him, right? It plays like he's hearing about it for the first time. Maybe he's making up this story in his mind. If it is all in his head, Clark has a terrible memory. His father didn't have a gruff southern accent. It would be weird if Clark made up a story in his head about the Lang farm getting washed away, but it would be weirder if that really did happen and he never heard about it until a ghost told him. Bruce and Alfred have an ominous conversation in an abandoned and dilapidated Wayne Manor about Bruce's legacy. I made the assumption in part 2 that the building had been burned. I guess I'm not sure. We aren't told what happened to it, but it looks pretty charred. I don't know why Bruce abandoned the mansion or how it got this way, but I have to assume one of his enemies destroyed his home. Again, considering how few establishing shots there are, we're lucky we even get to see what it looks like. It couldn't have gotten this run down just sitting there for 20 years, even without upkeep, I wouldn't think. Alfred tries to reason with Bruce one last time before he commits suicide, as Alfred calls it. He says Bruce can't win against Superman, which it will turn out Alfred is wrong about because he very nearly does. Bruce won't budge. He brings up his age again. He's afraid that he's been Batman all these years and it won't actually count for anything, and I like that a lot. I think he was maybe already worried about that even before Superman. All that crime fighting took a toll. This is his chance to make a lasting difference, not just take out the weeds, as he calls the criminals he's been fighting. I like his line, "I'm older than my father ever was." A Batman who sees more years than his parents, who died too young, and who are the reason he puts on the costume, and who sees a world still as corrupt and unsafe as it was when they were murdered, has to feel unaccomplished and jaded. It's not just about stopping the nightmare future. You could have this scene without that, even though his line, "This is about the future of the world," I think definitely refers to that. It's the most he ever acknowledges that in dialogue. But without the dream, it's still about the future, of course. This scene demonstrates just how far gone he is. He might truly believe what he's doing is necessary, but there's a massive selfish motivation, and Alfred sees that. Bruce isn't doing this just to save the world. He says it point blank, "It's about my legacy." And then he makes it an issue of destiny when he says the first Waynes in America were hunters. It's a flimsy justification. The implied argument is that this is just who he is and what he's meant to do, like he has no choice, even if it's ugly and counter to what he used to be about, protecting the innocent, not killing the bad guys, like he's been going against his nature all along, or killing anyone who's too powerful and might turn out to be the bad guy. I love Alfred's look of despair at the end of the scene, when he says to himself as Bruce walks off, "Alone in more ways than one, so falls the House of Wayne." That line reads a little melodramatic in a movie that can't decide just how realistic or theatrical it wants to be, but Iron's performance, once again, is spectacular. There's so much going on in his face there. He's sad, he's hopeless, but he's also horrified for what Bruce is transforming into. He looks like he's having his own nightmare as he watches Bruce leave. Alfred's watching him become the thing Bruce is trying to prevent in killing Batman. Makes you wonder what the world would look like if he succeeded, and that sounds like a way more interesting alternate future to me. I like this scene overall, and it has a moodiness that actually feels earned, punctuated by a wonderfully foreboding score. This tragic character study should have been the main focus of the movie. It works better out of context, though, because when I look at how Superman's been handling himself, I see Batman again as a lot more justified than he's supposed to be. But put Superman in the background and make Batman your solo protagonist, this is gripping stuff. This is where there really is something to that question of whether good men can have and wield power. It would have been a tall order to believably bring Batman back from that brink at the end, and he probably couldn't have gone as far as he did in his destruction and apparent sadism for me to buy it, but under the right pen, it could have been brilliant. And something totally fresh and new for Batman on screen. It's a great reason to cast him older, which I questioned in part 1, given that this is supposed to be the start of a long franchise. And Ben Affleck is great, as characters with a damaged psyche and who are deeply morally conflicted in movies like The Way Back. Well, folks, I was wrong. This isn't going any faster than the first hour was. In the words of Jim Carrey's Riddler, there's just too many questions. I certainly don't want to rush through the last hour, so we'll get to Martha's kidnapping, Lex's incessant roof ramblings, most of the action in the entire movie, and we'll try to answer the question, why did he say that name? In the actual I Swear to Zod final installment of this now 4-part monstrosity of a review. It's coming, nothing can stop it, the bell has rung, ding 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 ding. Bye.